Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. Tourist invades the Royal Guard's formation, and instantly regrets it. The atmosphere outside Buckingham Palace was electric with excitement. Hundreds of tourists gathered behind the barriers, cameras in hand, eagerly waiting for one of London's most famous traditions, the changing of the guard. For many visitors, this wasn't just another tourist attraction. It was a glimpse into British military precision, a chance to witness the legendary discipline of the Royal Guards, known for their unwavering stance and unshakable focus. But amid the crowd, one man stood out. He wasn't just another tourist. Dressed in a red military-style coat, dark trousers, and a black hat, he looked strikingly similar to the real Royal Guards. At first, no one thought much of him. Maybe he was just an enthusiastic fan, someone paying tribute to the elite soldiers. Maybe he was a part of some historical reenactment. But then, he did something no one expected. With a look of deliberate confidence, the man stepped forward. Then, as if he belonged there, he walked directly into the formation of Royal Guards. For a few seconds, confusion rippled through the crowd. Some tourists let out amused chuckles, thinking this was some kind of performance. A few people raised their phones, ready to capture what they assumed would be a funny, harmless moment. But the Royal Guards? They didn't laugh. They didn't flinch. They didn't acknowledge the man as one of their own. And that's when the energy shifted. A hushed murmur spread through the onlookers as the real guards, still standing in perfect formation, became aware of the intruder in their ranks. The tourists might have thought this was a joke. But for the Royal Guards, this was no laughing matter. And within seconds, the situation went from harmless curiosity to an act of complete disrespect. Something was about to happen. And no one was prepared for what came next. For a brief moment, the changing of the guard continued as usual. The real Royal Guards remained focused, standing in perfect formation, their movements crisp and precise. But then, something shifted. The presence of the mysterious intruder began to register. At first, the crowd still wasn't sure if this was part of the ceremony or some elaborate prank. A few tourists chuckled, nudging each other. Maybe he's part of a show, one woman whispered to her husband. Another man, filming the event, commented, "I don't think he's supposed to be there." People around him started to murmur, their expressions changing from amusement to uncertainty. But the Royal Guards didn't hesitate. They knew instantly that this man did not belong. Unlike the tourists, who were still debating whether this was real, the trained soldiers had already assessed the situation. And they were ready to act. The intruder, however, didn't seem concerned. His posture was confident, almost too casual, as if he thought he could blend in without being noticed. For a few long seconds, he marched in step with the real guards, mimicking their movements. To someone unfamiliar with military protocol, it almost looked convincing. Almost. But then, one of the real Royal Guards made a move. Without breaking formation, a soldier positioned closest to the impostor subtly shifted his stance, signaling to his comrades. A silent but clear message. "We have an intruder." The crowd, now sensing the change in energy, fell silent. No more chuckles. No more whispers. Just wide eyes and hushed anticipation. And then, before anyone could even process what was happening, a sharp, commanding voice shattered the air. "Stand down. Step away from the formation." The voice boomed across the courtyard, cutting through the tense silence. People gasped, some even instinctively stepping back as if the order had been directed at them. The man in the fake uniform froze, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. His casual confidence vanished, replaced by something entirely different. A sudden realization that he had made a huge mistake. The sharp command ripped through the air, freezing everyone in place. "Stand down. Step away from the formation." The once laughing crowd fell silent in an instant. All eyes were on the royal guard who had just spoken, his voice carrying absolute authority. But the man in the fake uniform? For the first time since he stepped into the formation, he hesitated. His confident stride had vanished. His body language shifted, stiff and uncertain. He had thought this was a harmless stunt, a fun little moment to entertain the crowd. But now, standing face to face with the real royal guards, he understood something terrifyingly real. He had crossed a line. And there was no turning back. One of the real guards broke formation, stepping forward with precision and intent. His face remained unreadable, his posture rigid and commanding. The tension in the air was palpable. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the tourists, gripping their phones, recording every second, seemed to forget to breathe. Would the man try to play it off as a joke? Would he argue? Would he run? The impostor raised his hand slightly, as if debating whether to comply or explain himself. But he wasn't given the chance. From behind the barriers, two uniformed security officers began moving quickly toward the scene. This was no longer just a prank. This was a breach of protocol. The royal guards were elite soldiers. They weren't trained to deal with foolish tourists, they were trained to protect the monarchy. And in this moment, every second of discipline, every ounce of training, was being put into action. The impostor finally took a step back, his hands still raised, his once confident expression crumbling into uncertainty. The guard who had spoken did not move again. He simply held his ground, his eyes locked on the man, his mere presence demanding immediate compliance. The message was clear. You do not belong here. And the entire crowd, standing frozen behind the barriers, finally realized. This wasn't just about tradition. This was real military discipline in action. The man in the fake uniform took another step back, his face now pale with realization. This was no longer funny. This was no longer a harmless joke. He had assumed the royal guards were just for show, that they wouldn't react. But now, he knew better. The air was thick with tension as the real royal guard remained motionless, his presence alone radiating power and discipline. The crowd, once filled with chuckles and whispers, was now dead silent. Even those who had been recording the scene held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, two security officers reached the man from behind. "Step away. Now," one of them commanded, his voice firm but controlled. The impostor hesitated, as if weighing his options. But he had none. There was no escaping this. Slowly, he lifted his hands, his body language screaming defeat. "I didn't mean any harm," he muttered. One of the officers gave him a sharp look. "You don't step into a military formation and call it harmless." The imposter nodded quickly, swallowing his embarrassment. By now, the entire crowd was locked in suspense. Some were still filming, while others were whispering to one another, exchanging shocked expressions. One woman shook her head. "I can't believe he actually tried that." A man next to her muttered, "He's lucky they didn't react more aggressively." And they were right. Because while the royal guards had remained professional, their authority had been unquestionable. Their ability to command respect, to shut down any sign of disorder in mere seconds, was something the crowd had never expected to witness firsthand. As the security officers escorted the imposter away, his face still flushed with embarrassment, the royal guard who had issued the command returned to position. Without hesitation. Without breaking focus. As if nothing had ever happened. And just like that, the ceremony resumed. The royal guards continued their routine, unfazed, unshaken, as if the incident had been nothing more than a minor disruption in a sea of perfect discipline. But for those who had witnessed it, this was a moment they would never forget. And for one foolish tourist, this was a lesson he'd never live down. As the security officers escorted the imposter away, the crowd remained frozen in stunned silence. For the first time, they had witnessed firsthand what it meant to challenge the royal guards. No dramatic action had been needed. No physical confrontation. Yet, with just a single command, the entire situation had been brought under control. Jake, a young tourist standing near the front, had recorded the entire incident on his phone. He had initially laughed when the imposter stepped into formation, assuming it was all a harmless joke. But now, as he watched the royal guards resuming their positions as if nothing had happened, he felt something he hadn't expected. Respect. These weren't just men in red coats standing motionless for tourists to gawk at. They were soldiers. Highly trained. Disciplined. Unshakable. They weren't there to entertain. They were there to serve and protect. Jake lowered his phone, glancing at his friend beside him. "Dude, they didn't even flinch." His friend nodded. "Yeah. They're built different." Others in the crowd murmured similar sentiments. A woman turned to her husband, whispering, "I thought they were just ceremonial. But now, I see why they command so much respect." A young boy standing with his parents tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, I want to be a soldier like them someday." The father smiled, patting his son on the head. "Then you'll have to learn discipline. Just like them." Meanwhile, the imposter was led far away from the palace grounds, his face flushed with embarrassment and regret. This wasn't just a lesson for him. It was a lesson for everyone who had watched. As the royal guards continued their routine, marching with perfect synchronization, the energy in the air had changed. What had begun as a spectacle for tourists had become a moment of deep respect. Because now, the crowd understood. The royal guards weren't just standing still. They were holding the line. Upholding centuries of tradition, discipline, and duty. And no one, no matter how bold, foolish, or confident, would ever be allowed to disrupt that. This was one of the most intense moments ever captured at Buckingham Palace. Do you think the royal guard reacted too harshly? Or was the man completely out of line? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this moment, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories like this.